Epilogue. Zipporah ended her formal education after 2 years of high school. By that time, she was getting steady work on the stage. In the same year, her father was able to stop working in the needle trade entirely, as he was invited to join the New York Philharmonic Orchestra as first violinist. The Feldmans moved uptown a few years later to live closer to Carnegie Hall. Sarah Feldman continued to work in custom dressmaking for uptown ladies for several years. She never gave up her Jewish wig. Tova's union became part of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, and Tova worked her way up through the ranks and became secretary of the organization. She was well known as a strike organizer and was a frequent contributor to the Jewish Daily Forward, writing about socialist causes. Miriam and Sean had 4 children and eventually moved to Brooklyn, where Sean became a fire chief. Indeed, Zippy's role in the Shulamith as the child eaten by the lion was just the very beginning of a long and illustrious career in the Yiddish theater. Zipporah Feldman became one of New York's Yiddish theater's most beloved stars. Her mother worried that neither one of her daughters would ever settle down and marry. Tova never did. But finally, after what Sarah Feldman called the world's longest courtship, Zippy and Yitzi Silver married in 1920. She was almost 30 years old. Yitzi had by this time become a millionaire as one of the largest women's cloak manufacturers in the country. Zipporah and Yitzi had 3 children, all boys. One, Yassel, joined his mother in the theater. One became a doctor, and the third joined his father in the cloak business. Zipporah's most distinguished role on the stage was that of the widow in the Jewish Queen Lear. She was hailed by critics throughout the world on her European tour in 1930. By 1939, World War II had broken out. Zippy and Yitzi worked feverishly to help Jewish children get out of Germany and escape the Nazis. They contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to various Jewish relief organizations, and after the war, Zipporah was honored by the Hadassah, an organization of Jewish women in America. In 1940, at the age of 50, and at the pinnacle of her acting career, Zipporah made her first Hollywood movie. A treacherous woman told the story of an undercover Russian revolutionary who works as the governess to the Tsar's children and helps plot the downfall of the Russian monarchy. For her role, Zippy was nominated for an Academy Award. She lost to Ginger Rogers, who won for the movie Kitty Foyle. She was disappointed she didn't win, but as she told her grandchildren in later years, not winning an Oscar wasn't the end. It was just a beginning. She was subsequently in 10 more motion pictures, and she and Yitzi bought a home in Beverly Hills, California, with a swimming pool and tennis courts. She learned how to swim at the age of 52 and took up tennis that year as well. Zipporah Feldman lived a very long life, which was rich with beginnings and endings, and much in between. When she was well into her 80s, she attended the stage debut of her great-granddaughter, Fruma, in the role of Mary Magdalene in Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical, Jesus Christ Superstar. She was interviewed at the theater by Barbara Walters, who asked her, "What does the First Lady of Yiddish theater think of her great-granddaughter debuting in a play like Jesus Christ Superstar?" "I loved it," replied Zippy. "Who wouldn't want to see her granddaughter singing and dancing so beautifully on the Broadway stage? Are you crazy? It's a wonderful role. Mary Magdalene was a very misunderstood Jewish girl. We would all do well to try to understand her story. That is what theater is about. Understanding human stories." Life in America in 1903. Historical note. Jews lived a precarious existence in 19th century Russia. They were required, by law, to stay in a designated area called the Pale of Settlement. Not permitted in the major industrial cities and limited to particular trades, most Jews found it difficult to make a living. Jewish men were arbitrarily drafted into the army, separating them from their families for years. In general, Jews were looked on with suspicion or outright hatred. When Tsar Alexander II was assassinated in 1881, the murder was blamed on all Jews. The soldiers of the Tsar, called Cossacks, began a wave of pogroms, attacks against Jews. Without warning, Cossacks would suddenly gallop on horseback into a sleeping village, rape and murder the inhabitants, and then burn down their homes. Pogroms were horrifying, destructive expressions of anti-Semitism. In whispers, the word began to circulate that America was a place where Jews were welcome. It was called the Golden Country because the streets were said to be paved with gold. Reluctant to leave their homeland, but fearing for their lives, over 2 million Russian Jews migrated to the United States between the late 1880s and 1924. Although Jews lived throughout the country, in the West, the South, and the Midwest, the largest number of Jews settled in sections of New York City, particularly on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, approximately 350,000 Jews lived within 2 square miles. They lived in dark, cramped tenements in unsanitary conditions where disease was a constant threat. It was uncomfortable and unpleasant, but at least Jews were physically safe from Cossacks and pogroms. It may have been disappointing to realize that American streets were not paved with gold, but a person who worked hard could earn a better living in America than was possible in Russia. Many young men borrowed money to buy pushcarts, worked as peddlers on the street, and in time were able to save enough of their earnings to open their own stores. With no real option to return home, Russian Jews put all their energies toward succeeding in their adopted country. For those who had difficulty, there were Landsmannhofs. In the Jewish tradition of charity, these organizations, created by people from the same shtetl, or hometown, provided for the sick, for a little financial help when needed, and for funerals. Sometimes the synagogue was part of a Landsmannschaft. But unfortunately, these organizations didn't last very long, partly because immigrants didn't want to be associated with the old ways or with the old country. They wanted to be American. There was pride in being an American. America was seen as a great melting pot, an ideal place where all individuals were an important part of the mix, no matter what their national or ethnic origins. Each person may have been considered equal by law, but in fact, people tended to stay with their own, and in the crowded neighborhoods there were often conflicts among the Irish, the Italians, the Polish, and various other groups. Still, immigrants were encouraged to adopt the American lifestyle, and everyone believed that material prosperity and social position were possible if you worked hard enough. But while some people were prospering, many were struggling, and even starving. When photojournalists like Lewis Hine and Jacob Riis documented the squalid conditions of poor immigrants, there was a public outcry demanding that something be done to improve living standards. Politicians advocated a social reform. Wealthy Americans, perhaps with a thinly disguised sense of superiority, volunteered their services and held fabulous charity balls. A variety of social, educational, healthcare, and welfare agencies were founded to help the less fortunate. To the Russian Jews, who valued and respected education, one of the most important and particularly American institutions was the public library. The new immigrants gratefully borrowed books and used the quiet rooms as a place to study and sit with friends. They were impressed with the American notion that everyone should be educated and eagerly took advantage of the public programs available to them. Adults went to night school to learn English and sent their children to public school. In their zeal for their children to assimilate and become American, parents stopped teaching them Yiddish, and unfortunately, the colorfully expressive language is hardly spoken by anyone today. German Jews, many of whom had immigrated to America in the 1820s, hired the newer Russian Jewish immigrants to work as tailors, seamstresses, general workers, and salesmen in their ready-made clothes businesses, called the needle trades. Some Jewish workers who had brought socialist ideas with them from Russia began to complain about their cruel exploitation in sweatshops. As early as the 1880s, these self-appointed labor leaders raised questions of workers' rights. A Jewish organization, the Workmen's Circle, was one of the first to set up a system of workers' insurance and benefits, and it also served as a center of social activity. They tried to organize all workers, not just Jews, and rallied for the formation of trade unions. To most workers, these ideas seemed too revolutionary, and they weren't willing to risk their paychecks by being associated with the union. When 60,000 cloak makers of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union went on strike, Louis D. Brandeis was called in to mediate between workers and employers. It was a milestone in the history of U.S. labor. Trade unions proved that they were a force. They had status. But then, in 1911, the tragic Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire killed 146 workers, mostly women and girls, who had been locked inside the factory, unable to escape the terrible blaze. This single incident created such great public sympathy for the workers' cause that many felt encouraged to demonstrate and hold strikes. For the Jewish community, this was a lively period of social and philosophical interaction. There were sports events, concerts, scholarly lectures, socials and dances, Yiddish newspapers, thriving Yiddish theaters, and exhilarating outlets for artists and intellectuals. The excitement of the times caused a tremendous conflict for individual Jews, as it has for many American immigrants. Young people were torn between the traditional religious and social practices of their ancestors and the liberal choices of a new, vibrant American society. Jewish family pressures exerted an extremely strong influence, but, finally, many traditions gave way. During the years 1880 to 1929, people from all over the world moved to America in unprecedented numbers. In the 1920s, there was a backlash against the continuing influx of foreigners, and the first act to restrict immigration was passed in 1921. Following that, the Immigration Act of 1924 created stricter requirements and quotas for all those wishing to move to the United States. Immigration from every country was severely curtailed, and Asian workers were denied entry completely. The period of spectacular immigration population growth and expansion had come to an end. But, by then, Russian Jews had been absorbed into American society. Many succeeded in a number of fields and influenced law, medicine, finance, music, literature, and theater. One Russian Jewish immigrant who made a great impact was Louis B. Mayer, co-founder of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and a developer of one of the most essentially American products, the Hollywood movie. Despite the struggles, hard work, and anti-Semitic prejudice, many Russian Jewish immigrants found a level of success in America. America may not have been what they originally expected, but it might be said that it turned out to be a kind of golden country after all. If you enjoyed this recording, please like, share, and follow me. Thank you.